I've been yelled at before. I've been judged before. But I've never had someone look at me with that kind of certainty, like they had already decided I was guilty. It was the middle of the afternoon. Bright sun, quiet street, the kind of neighborhood people describe as safe and family-friendly, the kind where lawns are trimmed like rulers and every porch looks staged for a magazine cover. I was leaning against my car, waiting for a friend to come outside. That's all. Then I heard her voice, sharp, polished, confident. "Excuse me, what are you doing here?" The way she said it wasn't curiosity. It was suspicion dressed up as politeness, like she was trying to make me feel like I owed her an explanation for existing. I gave a simple answer, waiting for someone. She blinked slowly, like my response was offensive. "You can't just loiter in this neighborhood." Loiter. I wasn't on her property. I wasn't bothering anyone. I wasn't even walking around. I was standing beside my own vehicle. Still, she took out her phone and said the sentence that has become a weapon in the hands of the entitled. "I'm calling the police." And then she added, loud enough for the whole street to hear, "Let's see how brave you are when the cops show up." My stomach tightened, not because I was afraid of the truth, but because I knew exactly how fast a lie can turn into a disaster when someone else controls the narrative. She thought she was about to win. She thought I'd be handcuffed, humiliated, removed like trash from her perfect community. But when the officer arrived and looked at me, he didn't reach for cuffs. He stood straight, and he saluted. I will never forget the sound Karen made in that moment, like the air got knocked out of her throat. Because suddenly, she had nothing to say.
Let me rewind and explain something. I wasn't there to cause trouble. I wasn't there to scope out anything. I wasn't there to test boundaries or make a statement. I was there for the most boring, ordinary reason on earth. My friend Marcus lived a few blocks into the neighborhood. He'd lent me a tool earlier that week, one of those random, "Hey, can I borrow this for a day?" things that turned into 5 days, because life happens. I finally had time to drop it off. Marcus's place was in a residential area that had a reputation. People called it nice, which is a polite way of saying it's the kind of neighborhood that believes it's better than others. As I drove in, I noticed the signs. Neighborhood watch, cameras in use, report suspicious activity. In theory, those signs are about safety. In reality, sometimes they become a warning. You will be watched. You will be judged. Still, I parked legally along the curb, exactly where other cars were parked. I checked my phone and texted Marcus. "Outside." He replied, "Be right there, give me 2 minutes." So I waited. I leaned against my car, I breathed, I scrolled, I let the quiet soak in. Then I noticed movement. A woman across the street, stepping out of a house like she owned the air around her. She had neat hair, neat clothes, a posture that screamed control. She stared at me with the intensity of someone watching a stray dog wandering into a fancy restaurant. At first, I thought maybe she was just nosy. But then she started walking directly toward me. That's when I knew this wasn't curiosity. This was confrontation.
She stopped close enough that I could smell her perfume. Her arms were folded, but her fingers were tapping her elbow like she was already impatient. "Hi," she said, in a voice that sounded friendly, except her eyes weren't friendly at all. "Can I help you?" I gave her the benefit of the doubt. "No, ma'am, I'm good. Just waiting for a friend." She tilted her head. "What friend?" Now, maybe you're thinking, that's not a big deal. But the way she asked wasn't normal. It wasn't, "Oh, you're visiting someone? Cool." It was, "Prove it." "I'm waiting for Marcus," I said. She squinted, like she didn't believe me. "Well, you can't park there." I looked around and pointed gently. "There are other cars parked here." She smiled, but it wasn't warm. "Those are residents." "I'm a guest." She took a step closer. "Guests don't just stand around like that. It's suspicious." Suspicious. Just standing there. Just existing.
I could feel the pressure building behind my ribs. Not anger exactly, something colder, something tired. Because I'd seen this before. Not always this obvious, but always the same energy, the assumption that I was the problem. I kept my voice calm. "Ma'am, I'm not doing anything wrong." That's when she sighed dramatically like I was exhausting her. "Look," she said, "I don't know who you are, but this neighborhood doesn't tolerate—" She stopped before finishing the sentence, but her eyes finished it for her. Then she did what Karens do when they don't get immediate obedience. She reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and said, "I'm calling the police." I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just asked, "Why?" And she answered with a lie that could have ended horribly, "Because you're being aggressive." Aggressive? I hadn't even lifted my hands. But in her world, aggressive meant not obedient.
She turned away from me just enough to pretend she was creating distance. Then she dialed. When the call connected, her voice changed immediately. It went from arrogant to trembling. Not real fear, performative fear. "Hello? Yes, I need police assistance," she said, loud enough for me to hear. "There's a man outside my house. He's acting suspicious, and I feel unsafe." Outside her house? I wasn't even in front of her driveway. But details didn't matter. What mattered was how she framed the story. She described my clothes, my car, my posture. And then she said something that made my stomach drop. "He won't leave. He keeps staring at me." That was the opposite of the truth. I wasn't staring at her. She was staring at me. I had been trying not to look at her at all. But when you're the one making the call, you get to be the narrator, at least at first. She kept talking. "He's getting angry. He might have a weapon." Weapon? My hands were empty. I didn't even have my keys in my hand. I felt heat crawl up my neck. Because I know what that word does. I know how weapon changes everything. Suddenly, this wasn't a simple misunderstanding. This was a dangerous escalation. That's why false calls aren't drama. They're not just being safe. They are a form of power, a way to bring the system down on someone you don't like. Karen hung up and turned back toward me, satisfied. She smiled like she just pressed a button and ordered my removal. "Just wait," she said. "They'll handle you." And then she stepped back, arms crossed again, like she was watching a show. Those minutes felt longer than they should have. The neighborhood remained quiet, but the air around us felt heavy, like the entire street was holding its breath. Karen stayed on her porch now, as if she was afraid to stand too close, but not afraid enough to go inside. She wanted witnesses. She wanted the story to be public. A curtain moved in a window across the street. Someone else peeked through blinds. When someone else pretends to be a threat, the trap is what happens to them. When people involve police, people suddenly become curious. Karen's eyes kept flicking to my car, then to me, then to the end of the road. She was waiting for the flashing lights like a child waiting for fireworks. I stood still. In my head, I replayed my options. Should I record? Should I call Marcus again? Should I leave to avoid escalation? And then I realized leaving could look like guilt. That's the trap. When someone lies about you, the safest thing can look suspicious. The calmest thing can look defiant. So I stayed. I pulled out my phone and texted Marcus again. "Where you at? This lady called police on me." He replied instantly. "What? I'm coming right now." I took a breath. Because here's the truth. I wasn't afraid of the police. I was afraid of what happens when someone else convinces them you're a threat. Karen watched me type and smirked. "Trying to delete evidence?" she asked. I didn't answer. She wanted a reaction. She wanted me to snap. She wanted to prove her lie. That's when I understood this was never about safety. It was about control. And then, the sirens arrived. Not loud, not dramatic, but enough. Karen's smile widened. This was her moment. Or so she thought. The patrol car rolled up and stopped a few feet behind my vehicle. The officer stepped out slowly, scanning. He looked at Karen first. She immediately waved her arms like she was directing traffic, rushing forward with urgency. "Officer, thank God you're here," she said, pointing at me. "That's him. He's been threatening me." The officer didn't respond immediately. He looked at me, and his expression changed. Not to fear, not to suspicion, to recognition. He stepped forward. He stopped. His shoulders straightened, and then he raised his hand in a clean, respectful salute. "Sir," he said, voice steady, "thank you for your service." Everything went quiet. Karen's mouth opened slightly, then closed. Her eyes darted back and forth like she was trying to understand what she was seeing. The officer kept his gaze on me. "Are you okay?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes, officer, I'm fine. I'm just waiting for my friend who lives here." The officer nodded again. Then he turned to Karen. "Ma'am," he said, "tell me what happened." Karen blinked rapidly. Her voice dropped a few levels. "Well, he was just standing there." The officer's eyebrow lifted. "And that made you call 911? She stammered. I didn't know who he was. He looked suspicious." The officer's tone stayed calm, but it sharpened. "Suspicious how?" Karen hesitated. And that hesitation said everything. Because she had no facts, no behavior, no crime, just a feeling. And feelings aren't evidence.
The officer asked direct questions. "Did he touch you?" "No." "Did he threaten you?" "Well, not exactly." "Did he try to enter any home or vehicle?" "No, but..." "Did he refuse to leave private property?" "He was near my house." "He's standing by his car on a public street." Karen's face turned red, then pale. You could almost see her processing it. She had expected instant punishment, instant dominance, but instead, she was being questioned. And then Marcus came running out of his house, breathing hard. "Officer," Marcus called out, "that's my friend. He's with me." He pointed at Karen. "She called the cops on him? For what?" Karen tried to speak, but Marcus's presence changed everything. Now there was a resident confirming my story. The officer nodded at Marcus, then turned back to Karen. "Ma'am," he said, "I need you to understand something. Calling 911 for a non-emergency or making a false report is a serious matter." Karen's lips trembled. "I wasn't lying," she insisted weakly. "I felt unsafe." The officer didn't yell. He didn't insult her. He did something worse. He stayed calm. "Feeling unsafe is not the same as being in danger," he said. "You described him as aggressive and possibly armed. That's a very specific claim." Karen swallowed hard. The officer glanced at me again, then back to her. This could have escalated badly. Karen's eyes flickered to the neighbors watching. She realized what she'd done, not just to me, to herself, because now everyone could see she had weaponized the police, and it didn't work.
Karen stood there, shrinking into her own silence. Her shoulders slumped, her voice faded. The woman who had approached me with authority now looked like someone caught cheating on a test. The officer made it clear he could cite her, report her, and document the false call. He didn't arrest her, but the warning carried weight. Marcus shook his head, disgusted. "This is unbelievable," he muttered. "You could have gotten someone hurt." Karen finally mumbled something close to an apology. Not to me, not sincerely, just enough to save face. Then she turned and walked back toward her house, eyes down, steps quick, as if she could outrun embarrassment. But she couldn't, because the street had seen it, the neighbors had seen it, and most importantly, she had seen herself fail. I watched her disappear behind her door and felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, yes, but also exhaustion. Because this wasn't just about one Karen. It was about a mindset, this belief some people carry that they own the right to decide who belongs and who doesn't. It's a social problem wrapped in a personal moment. Karen thought the police would be her personal tool, her reset button, her weapon. But she learned a lesson that day. Truth doesn't panic. Honor doesn't have to shout. And sometimes the loudest justice is a simple, quiet salute.